Okay, guys, we're going to use a segment from something we filmed actually last summer, but we've never actually used it for anything. It's of our dear departed friend, Peter McGough, the very highly respected writer, editor. He worked for MD for many years. Obviously, probably best known as the editor of Flex magazine and Muscle and Fitness. Back in, he started working for them in '92 when he moved to America. And he was just the one that kind of gave us all the very, very special stories. This was back when the magazines were this is all we had really to kind of follow the careers of all our favorite bodybuilders in the industry. And Peter was the one that really brought those to life. He was a friend. He was a mentor. He was a friend in need when some of the athletes needed guidance or a fatherly figure to help give them some advice. So I've sent this video, the full video, to his wife, Anne McGough, and Byron, and just so she's seen it. But this is of Pete McGough and John Hansen. We did this is for a different show. We never used it, but it's for the I had a team for Olympia history, and I asked John and Peter to give us some sort of very well-known stories from the Olympias from 1965 to 1995, and we got an hour out of it. So we still haven't decided what we're going to do with the full video yet, but I felt I just didn't want it to not be used, So we're going to use a little excerpt in this episode, and then I'll speak with the team at MD and we'll decide what we're going to do with the rest. But we're going to work in some really nice edits, and I just thought it'd be nice to put it in this episode. And just kind of remind us of why he was so special to all of us and so special to the industry, and why he's so missed. Obviously, sadly, lost his battle with cancer a few months ago. He battled hard for about 8 years, I think. I think it was 2013 he was diagnosed, and he was given like a few months to live even back then. But he kept fighting, and and he fought on for another 8 years. I think it was 8 years, and so I just I wanted it to be seen, and I hope you enjoy it, and that's it really. So okay, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the last ever, to the best of my knowledge, I think this is the last ever filmed video that Peter McGough ever did. So hope you enjoy it. When I was thinking about putting this Olympia a history segment together, I just thought we need two real sort of you were the two obvious names that came up as the ultimate historians of the Mr. Olympia. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to see what we're going to talk about.
That's another way of saying we're a couple of old farts. But
yeah, that's what I said.
Please edit that out. No. Okay, guys. Oh, right. Okay, the first topic I really wanted to talk about was the 1965 Olympia. Obviously, that's a significant one because that was the very first. So then, Peter, were you at that Olympia?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Let's talk about the 1965 Olympia.
Well, I mean, the Olympia came into creation because, Joe Weider figured that, we had the universe, we had the Mr. World, we had Mr. America, but he wanted an overall title that somebody that won those titles could go on to. Larry Scott had reached the end of his career. He got nothing more to aim for. And they had a dinner meeting, and Betty Weider was there. This was in '64, I believe, and talked about a new contest, an overall contest for the champion of champions. And they were looking for a name, and they were drinking Olympia beer. And this is a true story. I know it sounds fantasy, but it's true. And Larry was of the opinion that, well, Olympia beer, is that really great PR for a bodybuilding contest? Maybe it should be called, and he said this, Mr. Broccoli, that's healthier. But anyway, that was how the Mr. Olympia came into being, to create this overall, champion of champions mantle. And that it was launched in 1965, September, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
Was there any other considerations for the name? I mean, obviously it was named after the Olympia beer, and it was in that famous scene in the bigger movie. Was there any other name considered other than the Olympia?
I I don't know. It doesn't appear so because, even Larry's recounted the story, and apart from sort of saying we should maybe call it Mr. Broccoli, which obviously he was being, humorous, there didn't seem to be another name coming on. But if you think about it, the Olympia, it does fit the bill, doesn't it? Mount Olympia, champion of champions, something really big and special and over and above the universe. Yeah.
So what was it? How many competitors were in there? Do you remember, John?
Only three competitors.
Three competitors.
There was only, There was Larry, Harold Paul, and Earl Maynard.
Right.
Earl Maynard was a friend of my father's when he was in the RAF, based in Cyprus.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, he always said my dad had really good genetics for bodybuilding, and my dad said he was never interested.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that first night, they did hold the Mr. America and Mr. Universe contest before the Olympia, and Earl Maynard won the Universe and went forward to the Olympia. He finished third. Harold Paul was second. Harold was only 18, and some people thought maybe he should have won. He was amazing.
Yeah.
Harold Paul, often forgotten about, but a tremendous physique.
Yeah, that's not talked about a lot, but Harold Poole was unbelievable at a young age as a teenager. And I know the next year in 1966, a lot of people thought he should have beat Larry Scott. So he had an amazing physique for a teenager. He was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So he was 19 years old.
He was 21 actually.
21.
In that first Olympia, yeah. Just turned 21.
And obviously this was 12 years before the Sandow actually came into being. What did Larry win for winning the Mr. Olympia?
Well, all he won was a crown that year. There was no prize money. He did get 1,000 the next year, but no crown. So he probably appreciated the $1,000 more than the crown. Yeah.
The Imperial Margaret crown.
Yeah.
Do you have? Sorry, go on.
I mean, from the people I've spoken to that were there, people like Lou Ferrigno, Mike Mensa was there. He was only about 15 or 16, but came all the way to New York to see it. The thing they talk about is it was almost like Beatlemania when Larry Scott came out. The crowd was chanting, "We want Larry, we want Larry." And when he came out, Joe Weider was so excited. He sort of preempted Larry coming out. He said, "Doesn't he look fantastic?" And nobody had seen him yet, And Mike Mensa, showing how intrepid he was. When it was all over, he climbed over the barriers, went backstage, saw Dave Draper, Mike Mensa, walked outside with them, and there was like this massive crowd just waiting for them. And it was something like 1 o'clock in the morning. It really was shades of Beatlemania.
Was Larry the first guy to have 20-inch arms?
Oh, well, Leroy Colbert is
Leroy Colbert might have.
Yeah. It's always sort of debatable. I could say I got 20-inch arms if I put them both together.
Right.
So what was the format, John? Do you remember what the format of the show was back then? Because obviously we have the traditional kind of the rounds with the symmetry, and whether you don't have the symmetry anymore, we have the pre-judging, and then we have the finals, and then the pose down. What sort of do you have a recollection or a knowledge on the running formats of the shows in those very early days?
Well, from the articles I read, I know the night show, they tried to pack it with as much entertainment as possible. So they had a beauty contest called the Miss Americana contest, of course, along the lines of Miss America. And they also had a rock band that would play in between the different divisions. And like Peter said, they had the Mr. America contest, which I think had over 40 competitors. So that was pretty big. And then they had the Mr. Universe contest. And then they finally finished with the Mr. Olympia. But they only had 3 competitors in the Mr. Olympia, so they had to build it up. As far as the prejudging goes, I'm not really sure. I never really saw pictures of prejudging, so I'm not sure if they even had a prejudging or they just judged it live. I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah, I sort of am the feeling that they probably just did it in the evening. There was no afternoon prejudging, and it would be very quick. But like you say, John, it was a packed bill, with all sorts of things going on. There was probably a strength act in there as well. Rick Wayne, he won the short class in the universe. Dave Draper won the Mr. America. And he was a bit of a revelation then, because everybody looked upon Dave at that time as, being a bit heavy. But this was the time that he really whipped himself into shape. And, when he stripped off, he was clearly the winner in the Mr. America. Why he didn't go forward to the Olympia, I'm not really sure, because he certainly was good enough, to compete that year.
Yeah, for people that don't remember, Dave Draper back then was kind of like what Arnold wanted to be. When Arnold saw Dave Draper was in the movies. He was on the TV show The Monkees, and he made a movie called Don't Make Waves with Tony Curtis and Sharon Tate.
Wow.
And if you remember that movie last year that Quentin Tarantino did, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Sharon Tate was the central figure in that movie. And there's a scene where they're in Sharon Tate's house, and there's a poster of Don't Make Waves on the wall with Dave Draper on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was like a guy going into the movies. And Joe Weider really promoted him and Larry Scott as the ideal image of like the California bodybuilder, the blonde hair on the beach with the surf, the surfing boards and the hot blondes, and that was the image that Joe Weider wanted to promote.
Yeah.
So this was back in the days when, this was several years before even, you could actually select your own posing music, wasn't it?
Yeah, they probably just had a band playing in the background. I remember going to the Mr. Olympia in 1977.
Uh-huh.
I don't think they started music until maybe 1980 when Arnold won in Australia. I don't think they had it in those late 70s contests either.
So they couldn't select their own posing music?
Yeah, they just posed to applause. They posed to the applause of the audience.
Yeah, a lot of them just posed to Exodus, the theme from Exodus. Reg Park, he wasn't in the Olympia at all, but he used to pose to theme from the Glass Mountain, and that made him individual. He was the one that did have a signature music that accompanied them that, you sort of associated with him. But John's quite right. I think we'd be surprised at how maybe rushed everything was, and it wasn't spread out like it is now, over a whole evening. Of course, you've got many more competitors to do it with, but it was more a case, I think, of judging the physique than judging any sort of performance. That was a great posing routine. They were just saying this is the best body.
So what were the compulsory poses back then?
Well, I don't think there were any. They do their own thing. It was Oscar State that came out with the 7 compulsory poses, which didn't include most muscular at the time. This was in like 76, 77. He compartmentalized everything and formalized judging procedure into different rounds. So before that, it was a bit of a mix and match, I would think. Right, you come forward, hit a couple of poses, Franco, you do some poses, and we'll compare them, maybe like for like, who knows? There isn't a lot of film of that.
Yeah, one thing that really makes that contest special too, Giles, you have to remember, there was only magazines, and this was held in New York on the East Coast. So all these people in New York, very few of them ever saw these bodybuilders from the West Coast in person. They only saw them in Joe Weider's magazine. So when they were there, it was like seeing a movie star. It was like amazing that you're seeing this guy in person. And Peter mentioned Larry Scott coming out and posing. One thing he did was when they announced him, he stood in the side before he got to the spotlight, and he waited and he waited and he waited, and the crowd was going crazy. So when he finally stepped up on the stage, they went ballistic. They went nuts. And like Peter said, it was like the Beatles. It was like a rock concert. It was unbelievable. And he got this applause for like 10 minutes where they were just screaming, everybody standing up. It's just inconceivable today to think of that. It's just, it would never happen like that today.
So how many people would they have got at the kind of crowds? How many would they have got in a venue like that?
I don't know. How many would be there, do you know?
I think, let's be honest. Joe Weider was a showman. He hyped the attendance. I think he talked about 5,000. my understanding, it was more like 2,500. You know, it wasn't a packed auditorium, but it was a noisy auditorium. Like John says, in those days, and even somebody, you know, we never used to see these guys move. There was no such thing as videos for us to look at. So the only time you saw, and I always use the phrase, see the statues move, is if you saw them live and in person. So when this contest was mooted for New York, obviously the New York bodybuilding community, East Coast, they turned up on force, but you know, you didn't get people flying from California and Wisconsin to come to a contest, not in those days. You know, flights were much more difficult, but yeah, I mean, we could come to this at some later point, but the universe was still the big contest for the year. You know, the Olympia was trying to establish itself as the main contest. And of course, Joe was doing everything he could to promote that feeling. But it was a few years before it really overtook the universe.
How many?
Which was held in London. Well, 71, 72 were the sort of, you know, the crucial periods. You know, Arnold was winning the Pro Universe in what, 68, 69, 70.
Yep.
And then in 71, he was going to defend the title. Bill Pearl was going to enter. He did enter. Sergio was going to enter. And Arnold always said to me, he wanted to compete against Bill Pearl. In fact, he didn't actually say, I want to compete against Bill Pearl. He said he really missed being in that contest in 71 because he looked forward to beating Bill Pearl, not competing against him. You know, but then the IFBB brought out this rule that if you went into another federation, you wouldn't be allowed into the IFBB. And that same year, 1971, the Olympia was held in Paris, but Sergio was expelled. Franco was, because they'd already appeared in guest spots for, you know, NABA or some other federation. So Arnold was basically on his own. I know there were some other guys up there. But that was the year that the last year of the universe with Bill Pearl winning, Sergio being second in London, and Reg Park being third. Reg Park being third. That the next year, you know, we had the Olympia with Arnold, Frank Zane, Sergio, you know, Serge Nubret, Franco Colombo. This was in Essen, you know, which is a very controversial contest altogether. So it took a few years. It took sort of 5 or 6 years for the Olympia to establish itself as the premier event. Was it
the? Do you think it was the Joe Weider magazines that really helped to get that Olympia established as the #1 bodybuilding contest in the world?
Yeah, I mean, Joe was a master of hype and everything. And I mean, if you look back at the magazines of the time, Muscle Builder Power was so much more glamorous to look at than the other magazines. You know, I mean, with Joe, it was all visual. He knew bodybuilding is a visual sport, so he really poured it on. You know, showed stacks of photographs, and in a format which, you know, really introduced you into the contest. Whereas